Welcome back to the channel, ladies and gentlemen. In this video, we're going to go through an oil treatment. So from this to this, using this right behind here. Oil and heat. Pretty boring process, but we'll get into it, and towards the end we'll talk about some of the fine details surrounding oil picking mostly, because that's a key component in this method compared to the sugar method where you can pretty much use whatever. The oil one, you have to think a little bit more and maybe hunt around for the right oil. But first, let's have a look at the process. So let's blitz through this one real quick. We're going back to the slow cooker. Mine has a low, high and warm setting. We're going to choose the high setting today because the oil is not going to boil at 100 degrees and I have not been able to reach over 100 degrees on the high setting. Here you can see I've measured it and written them all down. So the water will bubble. At the moment I've got the chamber full of water and I'm just going to use little jars to do the individual tests of each stone. But for the typical use, you would actually just put the oil directly in there, just enough to cover the stones. It's not going to bubble or boil or evaporate off, so oil is actually really easy to maintain. You're just chucking enough to cover it all. The oil will die by the end of this. It gets a little bit cloudy and dirty, so you want to get rid of it each time. I've made a little baking tray there as well, so that I can put the stones on. I've already dried them, heated them up. Now I've warmed up the solution, warmed up the stones, and chucked them together, and they're just going into the slow cooker, which is right on the verge of boiling, so about 100 degrees Celsius. And then after a couple hours, we're going to take them out, give them a quick little pat, remove all the excess oil. You don't have to, but I like to, otherwise you get a big crust on the outside, a big glossy crust, and you have to remove it anyway. So you can see here, it's a little bit darker, not too much darker. It's mostly the wet effect that's making it look that deeper brown. And then we're going to wrap it up really tightly in foil so the oil doesn't escape. And then I'm doing a test bake at 120 degrees. I can explain this a little bit further towards the end, but essentially I use two different oils and one should burn faster than the other. So I wanted to test it at a bunch of different ranges, starting at 120, which is where the first oil was meant to have started to burn. But as you can see, I whip it open and honestly, it's not much of a change. So we're going to ramp up the temperature. I think I did a 150, but we'll jump straight to the 180. There was no difference with the 150 either, but the 180, we bake it away and then I'll whip them out. And unfortunately, once again, they're definitely darker, but you can still see that there's still a little bit of wet oil, particularly on the one on the left, which is the refined oil, higher smoke point. So it will take a bit more effort to cook off, which is what I was testing, so that was good to see. And then I ramp my oven all the way up to 230, pretty much the max it goes to. I could go higher, but I'll have to use something else other than that oven. And now when I'm unwrapping it, you can see all that burnt oil inside, and the stone is looking pretty crispy. Everything's pretty dry. There's a little bit of oil residue still in this one. You can see me wiping my fingers just to say, yep, there's a little bit left in that one. So the refined oil does take a little bit longer, which is why the oil selection is pretty important, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Alright, and here we are at the end. So you can see here I've got one completely untreated, one that was the sugar treated one in the recent video, and then today's ones, which are these two just here, two different forms of canola oil. Now I'll be doing a lot of other oils because the oil choice is much more important, as we'll get into in a second. It is completely different to sugar. The choice is actually pretty important, and I was testing these two for a particular reason. The treatment has worked, clearly, it's darker. It's taken a lot less time, so this can all be done in just a couple hours. Maybe like a 2-hour soak or a 1-hour soak and a 1-hour bake at a high temperature, and you can end up with this kind of result, which is comparable to the sugar, but you don't get that glossiness sometimes where there's a bit of oil kind of baked onto the surface. I do still like the sugar and heat option a little bit more. It's a little bit more consistent, a little bit more even, and I'd say even a little bit darker, though I could have pushed this to a higher temperature. My oven doesn't get higher than what I did, 230, 240, but if I put it on the barbecue or something, or in direct fire, then it would be a lot higher. So I'll probably try that in the future as well. But for now, let's talk about these two and a couple of the differences. So I used two different oils, as you could see if I zoom out a tad. So we had two different oils. This one here is a fairly refined canola oil, which resulted in a little bit of the oil not baking fully. This is what they would call like a high smoke point oil, so it can go to a much higher temperature without degrading, which for us is not ideal. We want it to actually burn a lot sooner, which is why I also compared the extra virgin. Now, supermarkets are not the most honest in the world, and I am slightly questioning the extra virgin part of this canola oil. So this is meant to be purely cold pressed. It's meant to be a pure cold pressed oil. Now in any oil you can get extra virgin or refined. So extra virgin just means that it hasn't been heat treated, it hasn't been chemically extracted, it's literally been kept very cold during the pressing, because you can do hot pressing as well. But this oil, if you look at the color of it, should always be pretty dark compared to its refined variant, which has had so much of the natural stuff stripped out of it. Whereas the color was okay. I thought it would be a little bit darker for being a purely cold pressed oil, but I also expected this to burn at about 100 degrees Celsius. And then this one more like 200, 230, somewhere up around there. Which is why I tried those different temperatures, and each unwrapping, I was more and more disappointed because this one did not burn at all quickly. So I am wondering whether how true their advertising is on this whole cold press thing, because color like this you could actually get in other ways, and it's still also not that dark. I've seen darker, so I am a little bit suspicious, and it did not burn as well as I expected, though it did burn a little bit easier than the pure refined stuff. It should have a smoke point down towards 100 degrees, a little bit higher, 110, but that's okay. Turned out okay-ish. I'll do a bunch of other oils. All that we're thinking about when we're doing the oil treatment is that we need to warm it up to get it inside the stone. I'll also do a future video with the vacuum, but you're trying to warm it up, get it into the stone. Hopefully it's penetrated a bit further than the sugar. I'm not 100% sure if it will, but I have experienced in the past that the oil did get in a little bit further. And then we just need the oil smoke point so that we can degrade it at a low enough temperature that we don't need like a proper furnace. Some really fine refined oils can go really high temperature, like up over the 250 degrees Celsius mark. So those ones we want to avoid. It is always better to get an extra virgin olive oil or something like that, but the cost is also much higher, which is why I think it's a bit of an advertising con every now and then, because this did not burn at the temperature that I expected. So a little sus, but there you go. We've got 2 oil treated ones. I'll do the same process for a bunch of others and then just do a comparison video of all the other oils. I won't need to show the process again. It's going to be exactly the same. Soak them, warm them up, let it really seep in, burn it, see how it looks. Pretty simple. Next video, probably acid. And then we'll get into stabilizing all of these. Plenty of stabilization to come. Some that take less than a minute, some that are going to take quite a long time. So, wish me luck. Hopefully you've learnt something from this one. Give it a try if you really want to. I still think sugar and heat is a bit better though. We'll see when we start slicing them up and everything as well. But that's that one. So, catch you in the next video, guys.